All right, so we just went live. And so as soon as we get confirmation from everyone that we are heard, then we'll start the broadcast. I mean, then we'll start the show. Just went live. And so as soon as we get confirmation from everyone that we are heard, then we'll start the broadcast.
Mute the
Hold on here. All right, I'm getting feedback here.
Hey. Yeah, you need to mute the your YouTube.
Yeah.
All right.
I just did. Okay. I've only been doing this for 4 years, so. Okay.
And the audio is good, so it looks like it's coming.
Let the record reflect that I do not have a journalism or a media degree, okay? I worked at an energy brokerage firm in Dallas and found out because they were mining Bitcoins, discovered Bitcoins, and fast forward 4 years later, here I is. Okay, so I'm not a, this is not CNBC, at least it's not yet, okay? Or Bloomberg. Okay, guys, okay, the audio is good. All right, so, all right, guys, this is Ty Zen. And we are here with us. We have two special guests today with us. One, you guys already know, he does not need any introduction, is the Honorable Grandmaster, legendary, world-renowned LeonFu.com. Say hello, Leon.
Hello, guys. Good to see you.
Right. And next to the Honorable Grandmaster, LeonFu.com. And by the way, guys, people always ask me if I actually call him, refer to him as LeonFu.com. When we're off the air, and yes, I do. Okay. Right. And next to the Honorable Grandmaster LeonFu.com, we have, right, David Johnston, the chairman of Factom Incorporated, right, who is involved with building the Factom project. We've had him on in the past, but and so say hello to everyone, David.
Hey guys, how's it going?
All right. So instead of me explaining who David Johnston is for the new people, right, I'll just let David explain himself. You know, can you give us a little background on yourself, David? How you got into Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies real quick, and then some of the projects that you've worked on in the past, and then we'll get into how you got involved with the current Rivets project as an advisor.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I was lucky that a friend introduced me to Bitcoin in 2012, and it really fit my economic model. I'm sort of a free market economics nerd, and so when my friend explained that it was non-governmental money that could never be inflated by politicians and was controlled by math, I was like, yeah, I'd like to change my green pieces of paper into that, right? So really lucky to get involved in Bitcoin early. Started going to the conferences, speaking about building startups, because that's what I've been doing my whole career, is building technology startups. And so went to the San Jose Bitcoin conference in 2013 and ended up co-founding the BitAngels. So this was the first angel investment group in the space in May of 2013 with Sam Yilmaz and Michael Turpin. So that really led me to getting exposed to hundreds of different Bitcoin startups. This is like when Coinbase and BitPay and all the early companies were kicking off. And so the BitAngels ended up deploying about $7 million in Bitcoin into a lot of those early companies. But what I realized is my passion was for, call it the infrastructure level, the low-level infrastructure of the space that everything else was going to need to build on top of. So I ended up co-founding the Decentralized Applications Venture Fund. So in late 2013, I had written the General Theory of Decentralized Applications white paper, sort of proposing this model like, hey guys, we can use, you know, blockchain ledgers, peer-to-peer networks, a digital token for incentives, and this whole Bitcoin model for things other than payments, things other than just storing wealth, right? So ended up getting to advise Ethereum early on. We advised the folks at MadeSafe early on, introduced the founders of Factom, Paul Snow and Peter Kirby and the other early folks there. And so that just ended up taking over all of my time in my life, was helping out with these decentralized applications. So ran the venture fund for a few years and then ended up as the chairman of Factum. It was the most successful thing in our portfolio. And I'm sort of like the most overactive chairman ever. I spent like 70 hours a week in their office. So mostly helping with investor relations and strategic partnerships and stuff like that. So I've gotten a chance to speak at 25, 30 blockchain conferences around the world. And yeah, it's really cool to be part of a global community where there's just so many people inventing cool technology all the time. And that's how I ended up as an advisor to Rivets. Is I had known Stephen, the CEO at Rivets, Stephen Sprague, since 2013, and seen the technology go from him proposing it to a working prototype to now being in production, where they've connected these trusted execution environment chips in phones and computers to making secure transactions, sending secure messages. So I've kind of seen the evolution of that project. And back when I was running the dApps fund, I had proposed to him, hey, Stephen, I mean, a great model is if you could adopt a token, a utility token, that would incentivize people to help support this security network. But sort of the platforms really weren't there yet, right? 2014, Ethereum was yet to come out. A lot of the infrastructure wasn't there yet. And he said, no, it's too early. So when he came back to me, when Stephen came back to me in 2017, it was like, all right, I think the pieces are there now. We can actually pull this off to create a decentralized application that extends the security and attestation network we've built to everybody that wants to hit that API. I was like, that's amazing, because I've just seen lately how important security is. So I immediately said, yeah, I'd love to be an advisor. And I think of it as one of those core technologies that's required for this space to mature and really reach a mainstream audience, right? Because without secure sending and holding of crypto, it's always going to be this huge bar of becoming a security expert in order to really access this space. So that's why I'm passionate about it and happy to talk about it from what I know of the project and seeing it evolve these last 3 or 4 years.
Okay, so let's start from the thanks for that back story there, so that the audience can get a better background of who you are and how you got involved with the Rivets project. Let's focus on the Rivets project that you're serving as an advisor. First of all, so that in case anyone is new to our channel, can you explain what the role of an advisor is to the project? Because sometimes when people pull up these different projects, it lists their team, and at the bottom it'll list like these are the people that are advisors to the project. Can you talk a little bit about that? What the role is?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely a broad title, and it really dependent on the advisor how deep they go into a particular project. For me, I get the request pretty often to be an advisor on these projects because I've advised these other larger projects in the past. So I have to, unfortunately, decline a lot of those invitations just because I don't have the time to advise them all. But I try to take 2 or 3 projects a year, and it involves reading their white paper when it's first getting written, hopefully offering useful feedback there. I like to do basically an informational report on the projects that I'm helping. And so I'll spend hours asking the founder and the team questions about the technology, about the economics of what they're doing, and I distill that into an informational report, which I usually post on my Medium blog. And so I did that for Ethereum before their software sale. I did that for MadeSafe and Factum and Storage and plenty of other projects. And so I've written up an informational report. People can find it on my Medium blog. I think it's Johnston EC. Just Google that on Medium, and you should find it. But taking all that information and trying to crunch it into something digestible, like tell me about this team, tell me about why this technology matters, tell me about where it is in development. It's nice that these guys are already sort of in production, so there isn't a lot of forward-looking, will it work or will it won't work. It's already working. They're just opening it up as an open network now. So that's some of the value I try to provide, and a lot of it's just education. Like, people don't have the time to spend hours and hours digging into these things, so I try to do that as an advisor, and then be able to answer questions from the community when people say, oh, well, how does this part of it work, or Why is this important? So I try to become enough of an expert on the project that I can answer those type of questions and add value that way. Because a lot of this is just it's education and getting people up to learn into it.
So so just so that the audience will know, right? The way that Leon Food.com and I was made aware of Rivets was that it was through you, right? You brought it to our attention, and we saw that it looked like an interesting project. And the other thing that got us interested was that we noticed that you've been in like one of the quote unquote veterans or one of the old timers, in crypto community space, the cryptocurrency space. And we know that you don't write reports on a lot of projects. That's something we do keep in mind, that, hey, when David writes a report on something, we need to pay attention to it. And so that's why I wanted to bring you on for our audience, because we know that you don't do that for too many projects. So could you talk a little bit and just start off so that the audience understands, basically, and bring it down to the Main Street level, right, and not so much technical. What exactly, right, is Rivets, so that people know what it is?
That's a great question. So the way I think about it is Rivets is basically built-in security for people holding crypto, for wallets, for exchanges, for anybody that needs to have a high level of confidence that the person making the withdrawal or the deposit is really that person. So let me just start by saying security today is terrible, like just absolutely terrible. And I had this reinforced just recently, a couple of months ago. I got a call at 11 p.m. from a friend, and he had been hacked, right? And so I helped him recover his accounts and tell him what he needed to do to reset his passwords and put in Google Authenticator and call his phone company, recover the use of his phone. Because the truth is, it's just not that hard to hack people. I mean, if you call up the phone company and somebody doesn't have a security pin on their account, they're going to ask you really easy questions, like your address.
His phone was hacked.
His phone was hacked, right?
Okay.
The hacker called up the phone company,
yeah,
and they say, hey, I lost my phone. I need you to port my number to my new device.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a security pin, they ask you stuff like your address and your last four, your social, and your birthday. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Like you can find that stuff on Facebook or on Google in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Without
even going to like illegal, leaked databases. Right?
You don't even have to go to your carrier. You can go to, like, if you're switching from T-Mobile or AT&T to T-Mobile or anything.
Right.
It's because I just recently switched carriers.
Yeah.
And it was so easy.
Disturbingly easy.
I could have been anyone.
Right.
I could have been anyone to just move my number over to another phone.
Yeah. So this happened, and then I get off the phone with him. It's 1 p.m. the same night, and it's 1 a.m. the same night, and I get another call. Another friend has been hacked. And this happened every night for 7 nights in a row, right? There was a concerted effort as the value of cryptographic assets increased recently from these attackers to go after people and try to get their funds, right? So, you got to do things like add Google Authenticator. You have to, call the company, make sure there's a PIN on your phone. There's all these steps,
Or just not to use the phone number that you used as a two-factor as a secure. Like, don't use the phone number you give out to everyone.
Right. Well, and even beyond that, you shouldn't use any phone number. Most of these services will let you print out backup codes instead of using your phone as a recovery mechanism. Because if all they have to do is get control of your number, as we've talked about from social hacking, that's really easy. So you need these backup codes instead of using your phone. You need to use an authenticator app. Instead of using your phone number for 2FA. There's all these steps, but it's really hard to expect everybody's going to become an expert in cybersecurity, right? I spent a week till 3 a.m., 7 nights in a row, calling friends and family and business partners. And eventually I was just doing this proactively and calling people up and saying, have you done these things yet? I'll spend an hour with you on the phone right now because I don't want you to be the next person to call me and report this problem, right? So that approach isn't working, right? That's often referred to as network security. Like, we're going to secure the network by these many steps. The idea of Rivets is that you build in the security to the device itself. right? Stephen is leveraging something that's been around for a while and that he's actually pioneered the last 15, 20 years, which is these trusted computing elements inside the phone. This is basically a separate chip that doesn't interact with the operating system, and it has a public and private key pair. And so you can sign something from that TEE, that trusted execution environment, and send it. And I know really, really sure that it came from that device, right? Because that key pair is unique to that device only. Mm-hmm. So now you raise the bar where the attacker would like literally have to get your phone for them to be able to do this attack, right? They can't just call up from wherever, you know.
They can't just walk into a T-Mobile store.
They can't just walk into a T-Mobile store in Boston and get your stuff, right? Yeah. Because it's connected to the device itself. So I think Stephen is right. The big thing that he talks about is instead of trying to do network security, which isn't working, we should really get to device security. Because if you can build device security, then you can have a lot more confidence about the people that are sending those instructions, whether it's, you know, you're logging into your Exchange account and you make a request to withdraw. Well, today they use these insecure methods to try to make sure it's you making that request, right? This would really bring it to a whole new level. So for me, and Stephen had called me like only a couple weeks after this happened, and it was really fresh in my mind that like security really sucks today. And so I was like, yeah, we need that, and we need that at all the exchanges and all the major wallets for this to really go mainstream in the ecosystem. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to be a problem. So that's the most basic way I can break it down, is Rivets is building this in to the actual device. And the way they've done it is they have relationships with the Intels of the world, and they've gone through a really long process to get permission from those folks to access the TEE, which most developers can't.
Is Rivets similar to, because things like this happen, it sounds a lot like a Newbie Key or a UTF,
right.
a USB device. So we already have that today. I mean, we already have Newbie Keys. It's been around for a while, and we already have device. So why do we need Rivets then if these hardware dongles already exist?
How many people have them?
Well, that's true, but they're $40 each, or you can get a Newbie Key for $40, and
sure.
So why don't the reason people don't have them, I would argue, is because most services don't support it yet. Right? Most places, there's only a handful of sites that support these.
Google,
hardware.
Gmail.
Well, my bank doesn't, for example.
Yeah.
I
Sure.
use a bank and it doesn't. So I see hardware solutions already exist right now, but I see I see the challenge really is
sure.
to get, people don't have them, and then Rivets will run into the same way. How do you get services to support Rivets the same way? How do you get more services to support these hardware dongles? I see it's the same challenge then.
Well, I think having the fact that these chips are already built into several billion devices, whether they're your mobile phone or your PC, is a big difference between having to buy the hardware. I mean, you have to think about this. For most people, they don't know Newbie Keys exist. Like my parents don't know Newbie Keys exist.
Yeah.
And so just the barrier of knowing that technology is available is really high.
Okay.
Then getting them, thinking you're in the audience that actually needs this level of security, that's another barrier to using it. And then the inconvenience of having a separate device that you need to remember, carry with you, bring where you need it, adds a third layer of complexity. It's sort of like, yeah, I could get a nice camera, but I got one in my phone. I'm just going to use the one in my phone, right? This is why we saw this great decline between non-phone cameras, right? Because it's so convenient. It's already in my hand. It's already in my pocket. So that level of convenience, I think, is really key. And when people are going to use it is I think people are going to demand it as all these attacks are happening. I mean, I'm certainly putting out a request right now, like to the exchanges. I really hope you integrate this technology. And I know that there's active discussions going on where people are encouraging the exchanges to improve their technology because there's been so many of these attacks. So I think the exchanges that adopt that approach, which is really easy to do thanks to the Rivet technology, will benefit from more customers, more capital, more confidence of their users, and they'll outperform exchanges that don't adopt
So
these
let me just ask you a question. For now, if I want that type of security, let's say I want to log into my Exchange account, I would have to go buy a YubiKey or some kind of hardware dongle, stick it into my computer, and then it can authenticate because I have that dongle. What you're saying is that this computer already has that technology built into it. There's no reason I should have to go buy a separate USB dongle just for this purpose.
It's already there.
It's already in this computer that we're using right now, you're saying. So if the hardware is already there, why is it that no exchanges, my bank doesn't use it, my trading accounts don't use it? It seems like it should just become a standard. We still rely on username and passwords, and I have to do a two-factor, type in a code every 30 seconds to log in. When you're saying that I can just the exchange can simply know this is my computer. Right. And that's it.
You may have actually been using it without knowing it.
Okay.
Have you used Apple Pay?
I have used Apple Pay. I do. I'm an iPhone user.
Apple Pay leverages the trusted execution environment in your phone. And so what Stephen is essentially doing, and you can see from the example of Apple Pay, where people have actually bothered to do this, is where money's on the line.
Yes.
Right? The history or the security of visiting my Facebook, maybe not, crosses that threshold of importance.
My bank doesn't use it, like to log into the bank that I use.
They use other ways of trying to detect the device and the IP address and things like that. But my point is, it is starting to enter the mainstream.
Okay.
Apple Pay is a good example where you want to know and connect to that particular device to a payment being made. What I would say is Stephen's just at the leading edge, and Rivets is at the leading edge of bringing this technology into blockchain. Because there's a lot of technology out there that exists that there just hasn't been somebody in the blockchain space that is an expert in it and is bringing that to the table, right? So Rivets is the first group I've seen that already has an expertise in this and is bringing that to the table specifically for the use case where assets are valuable enough.
Apple Pay does not use a blockchain to do this. So you don't need a blockchain to do what you just described, such as Apple Pay doesn't use a blockchain. YubiKey doesn't use a blockchain. Why does Rivets? What does the additional capabilities a blockchain brings to this that existing solutions that already use the hardware to do that type of authentication don't have right now?
Hey, just real quick, guys. I just want to jump in for this, so that because we've been mentioning a lot about the Newbie Key and everything, and just so that the audience understands, so that we don't get too technical for them, I just want to just pause real quick and explain what an Newbie Key is, in case someone's listening and they're not using proper security. They may not know what an Newbie Key is. Okay, so there's, according to Andreas Antonopoulos, there's 3 ways that you can authenticate who you are for security reasons, and that's important for computer security to be able to authenticate who you are. So one way to authenticate who you are is by what you know, such as the password in your head or the passphrase in your head. And number 2 is what you are, such as I'm Tizen, I have a specific fingerprint and retina scan, so that proves that, for security reasons, who I am or what I am, right? And the 3rd way to prove and authenticate who you are for security reasons is by having a hardware device, such as a phone or what David Johnston and Leon's been talking about, called an Newbie Key. It's just a small electronic device that you put on your car keychain or on your necklace or something, and every time you want to log in, you have to touch that key to your computer or plug it into the USB port to authenticate that that's who you are. So, what you know, such as a password, what you are, such as your retina scan or your fingerprints, and then what you have, such as a phone or an Newbie Key, some type of electronic device that only you have. So now, whenever you guys hear them talk about, David and Leon talk about, authenticating who you are for security reasons, then it'll make more sense why Rivets, why it pertains to Rivets. So, Leon, you were asking why a blockchain was necessary.
Yeah. So why does Rivets, like these hardware devices are now almost universal? They've been for a while right now, and existing solutions such as Apple Pay don't use a blockchain. So why do we need a blockchain now versus what we have right now?
So I guess I would say ease of developers accessing this technology. As I mentioned before, Intel and these chip companies have a very lengthy process for getting access to the trusted execution environment. They don't let most developers touch it, right? Because it's a very sensitive area of the device where if you uploaded malware or some bug, got in, it would be very bad for the system because it's operating outside of the operating system, and sort of is a master control area of the device. So Rivets essentially spent the money and the time to go through that process. I remember when Stephen was doing that in 2013 and 2014, they spent, memory serves, 12 to 18 months getting approval from Intel and all these other groups to access the trusted execution environment to offer this service. So now that they've done that for everybody, they've essentially extended this API package where any developer can hit them up for attestation, right? That's attesting that a device is what it was before, right? So this works like the device has a fingerprint, right? The signature or the transaction that's been signed by that pair key, public-private pair key, and by publishing that on Rivets and then going back later, hey, is this the same? Blockchains give me a level of immutability that I can't trust the central party to give me, right? Because I'm then trusting that central party hasn't been corrupted and they become the central point of failure. So by using Rivets and building this on top of a blockchain, there's an immutable record that couldn't have been altered by anybody of the identity and history of this device. So that's one of the advantages. The other one is sort of the openness of all this, right? Apple's using it for their own purposes.
Yeah, that's right.
And Apple actually creates their own chips, right? So they have control of that to a certain extent, but they're not necessarily offering that as a general service to all developers.
So what you're saying is right now, even though that trusted execution environment already exists on my computer, right, that I am not able to write any code to access that. I have to go to Intel or whoever manufactured my chipset in order to get access to that. That's not an easy process. That's something that only very, very few people are able to do. So what you're saying is once Rivets accomplishes,
well, they've already done that.
They've already done that.
Yeah.
I could use their API and through them. So basically what you're telling me is Intel has basically given permission to Rivets to act as a gateway. Yeah. That for what Stephen has done is really that Intel is trusting Rivets to provide a secure API to access their trusted execution environment. That's open to the public. That it's secure enough that anyone going through Rivets' APIs can then get to Intel's trusted execution.
So they've reviewed the Rivets code and the Rivets process, and they're like, all right, we blessed this with holy water. You can run within the TEE. And what they're extending to everybody isn't the ability to load up their own program, if you will, but to do these set series of functions, right? Whether that's publishing this identity or checking this identity, right? There's specific API calls that you can make to Rivets, and they're leveraging, like you're saying, on behalf of the community, this trusted execution environment.
So really, but the blockchain part comes in is, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I heard from you was that, let's say this is my computer that we're using right now. I can register on Rivets that this computer belongs to Leon Fu, and therefore this, if an authentication request comes from this particular computer, that's Leon Fu, and no one can go in and change it. Like you couldn't. I guess if you stole my computer, you could impersonate
it raises me. The bar.
But like you won't be able to take your computer and then impersonate me.
That's right.
Right? You'd have to actually find my computer in order to impersonate me.
Right, which is a much more expensive attack than just reaching over the internet, right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. That's the question I had, Ty. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make it clear because a comment came in through the live chat box that was kind of interesting. So Team Money asked, so if Intel trusts Rivets already, right? So does that mean that is there a tie right now between Rivets and Intel? Are they working together and collaborating together, or is that something that happened in the past?
It's active in the sense that they've got access to the trusted execution environment. And Stephen could speak more intelligently to which chipsets they've done that for. But basically, they're among a dozen security partners that I'm aware of that have gone through this lengthy and expensive process.
Oh, okay.
Offer this, so they actively have that relationship, and they would need to do that for whatever chipset the devices they're trying to serve, right? Intel just happens to have the most common chipset, right?
Sure.
You know, most computers are using Intel chipsets, but there's certainly exceptions to that. So they can't serve everybody. The chip originator isn't making.
Well, Stephen mentioned that they want to focus on mobile when we interviewed him previously.
Sure.
Does he have relationships with ARM or whoever the chipset maker that our phones use? Does he have that relationship as well?
He'd have to speak to which partnerships. I don't know which ones they've made public or which ones are still private, but I think part of his intention is to expand this chip by chipset by chipset. And that's a really high barrier of entry that anybody wants to follow, right? Would have to spend a similar amount of time and energy
to develop those partnerships. Really.
Going through that process, exactly.
Okay. All right.
But to go back to why the blockchain, I do like the model that Stephen has settled on when it comes to the actual software licenses that are being originated here, because it's a means of creating a valid request to a smart contract that is executing this attestation, right? So meaning people can't flood their servers with a trillion requests, right, that don't cost anything. There has to be some cost to prevent spam or a denial of service attack, right? And this is common amongst most blockchains, right? Ethereum has Ether and gas, right, so that you know it's a valid contract. Factom has factoids and entry credits, right, for the same reason.
The entry fees to make it,
This is why Bitcoin has a dust limit, right, and a transaction fee, so you don't get flooded with spam transactions. So the same thing needs to be present in the Rivets network in order to know that it's a valid request for this attestation. So there's a very simple utility model for the use of these software tokens, as opposed to where I think a lot of projects get difficult is they end up with these really complex models. But for what Stephen wants to do, it's very, very straightforward.
So I could then register as, like, let's say I have a Mac, an iPhone, an Android phone, and all these devices. I could register all of them on a Rivets blockchain. And so anyone I authenticate knows that Leon Fu, these 4 devices belong to leonfu.com, right? And not any other device.
Sure, though you're probably not the core audience. I think the core audience are folks like exchanges, which are already interacting with tens of thousands of customers, and they've already got multi-factor processes in place. If they activate this as a multi-factor authentication method, this allows them to be a lot more confident about the requests that their customers are making. And I say you're not the core audience because this is the type of thing where you really need a development team and a use case where there's value in doing it. So I don't imagine you'll have lots of individuals registering themselves. I imagine you'll have lots of businesses that serve big crowds of individuals that will want this type of service to improve their security.
But right now, like, for example, if I log into an exchange account, they log my IPs, of course, and they know that, okay, we know this user came from Austin, Texas.
Right.
But as soon as I get on a plane and I go somewhere else and I want to log in, now I have to go through that again. I have to go email. I have to basically re-authenticate myself, just because I moved, right? Just because I picked up my computer and moved. But now with Rivets, there's a database saying that this computer belongs to Leon Fu, and if I go somewhere else and travel and I'm no longer at that IP address, they can still have a high degree of confidence that that's still me. Is that correct? Because the security has moved from the network where they were buying. It's this IP address is where Leon usually comes from. Now he's coming from somewhere else. It may or may not be him, right?
Yeah, that goes back to moving the security model from the network to the device.
Okay.
Which is a lot harder to fake. And again, I don't think we're going to get there if everybody has to be savvy on independent pieces of hardware, right? You know, people do that when they have lots of money and lots of sophistication, but the average user just doesn't get there.
So it would automatically register my device once I sign up for an account. Whatever service I'm using can automatically say, this is Leon Fu's computer. Let me just make a note of that. And if I get a login from somewhere else, then maybe Leon got a new computer, but we now have to make sure, right? Right,
exactly. And there's a Rivets app, and I think the intention is you'll have the easy ability to push one button and say, yes, I'm connecting my device, and this app and authorizing this.
Okay. So they're going to make it easy, like when I upgrade my computer,
right,
to just move my identity to a different machine, different device.
You can always update records, but then you're also re-beginning the reputation of that device.
Okay.
Right, because time is the best way of preventing fraud. Right, people don't tend to know the type of fraud they're going to commit in the future. People are always lying about the past. And so by having sort of this immutable record over time of I use this device and it's been associated with, good actor actions.
Yeah, that's right.
That I know over time.
So I can build a whole history like with the computer right now. And I know that, hey, Leon's been using this computer for the last 3 years for hundreds of times. But the question I would have is, what about, doesn't this raise privacy concerns? Because you are, almost, what I'm saying is you're almost, if you're making this record, you're almost like creating an entire history of a permanent record of all the devices that I've ever used, potentially with the services I've used. Like how is Rivets going to address the privacy concerns? Maybe I don't want to have a record of where I am, of what devices I've even been associated with. How are you going to? Well,
again, you're not going to make that record available to the public. You're going to make that record available to the services that you've authorized and to yourself.
Okay.
Right? So imagine this in the Factom context, right? There's the ability to publish data on the Factom network, but if it's a hash, people don't know what that hash is unless you had the raw document and you can recreate that hash. It's just random numbers and letters published out there. So I think it would be concerning if you were doing that in plain text, if you will.
Okay.
But the whole idea is to have privacy to the application and privacy to the device. So, I mean, the service is going to have to know, and you've authorized them to do that, and you're going to have to know. But I don't see technically why anybody outside of the two of you would need to know.
Okay.
So.
All right. Cool.
I think that limits the exposure.
All right.
So you mentioned earlier about there's like some feedback. You mentioned earlier that the Intel chips that's inside my phone, my laptop, my computers and stuff, David, you say that this area in the chip called the TEE, which stands for the trusted, the encrypted environment, right? You said that a person or a company has to go to an extremely lengthy security process to qualify to be able to access that part of the chip. And you're saying that Steven and Rivets has already went through that lengthy process already and have been approved by Intel to access that portion of the chips, that security portion, the trusted execution environment of the chip. Is that correct? Okay, so basically what I'm asking is not every random Joe can just go up to Intel and say, hey, I want access to this secured environment inside your hardware and be able to just program it however which way they want. Is this correct?
That's right. It's a pretty lengthy process to go through. And what I would say is it's been cool to see Rivets come from, a proposal and a prototype back in 2013, 2014. And today they're serving large enterprise customers. I'm not going to name names because I don't know which Steven has made public or not, but we're talking huge institutions that really care about security, not surprisingly, are the most willing to pay for this type of service. And so the proof is in the pudding, right? They have contracts, they have customers, and the technology is already out there. What they're doing today is saying, okay, now we can extend this service to the rest of the community who aren't going to go through an enterprise contract process. They just want to be able to hit an API and talk to a smart contract and offer these software licenses to prove they're making a valid request. So I think that's really cool because it gets beyond big institutions and starts to include everybody, like the exchanges and wallets, that wants to improve their security, but they're not going to go through this lengthy process themselves any more than most companies, are going to do what T0 did to go through the lengthy SEC approval for securities on the blockchain, right? They spent like 18 months and millions of dollars to do that, and people just now want to use the T0 platform, right? They don't want to re-go through that process, right? That's the beauty of economics, right? We can have specialization. So this is an example of Rivets doing that specialization and extending that to the rest of the community, which I think is really cool.
Okay. So I thought that was pretty cool that you mentioned that, because at first it sounded like, you know, anyone was able to access it, but what you're saying is that not everyone is able to access it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now is this Rivets, is that a software, an app, or a hardware? Can you describe exactly what it is so that the audience knows? We've been talking about it, but it's not clear to everyone, or at least not to me, if it's a software or a hardware, phone app or a computer app or.
So the tool set that they've got today is a series of APIs, and I believe they're going through the app process as well, to make this interface really easy to use. But, you know, it's not a question of people having to sort of build something custom or it being very difficult to interact with the software. You know, it's really a software interface. It's not a piece of hardware they have to buy, because again, you're just accessing the existing trusted execution environment. And what you're doing is, because they've gotten the permissions from the chip manufacturers, their app, if you will, has the access that you wouldn't normally have to this trusted execution environment. And so they've basically gone through a permissioned process with these manufacturers, and when the device sees their app, it gets a level of access that you wouldn't normally be able to get an app, right? But you take normal apps on a mobile phone, and you're allowed to do certain things, right? You need user permission to access pictures and, you know, GPS data and all these things. So think of this as a new level of access permissions, right? They're a set of developers, Rivets is a set of developers. They've gotten a higher level of permission from the phone and chip manufacturer than it's normal for an application to get. Because this is one of the things, even in the Apple app process you have to do, is you have to disclose all the things you're going to ask the user for. And Apple will often push back and say, no, you guys don't really need access to all their contact info. Like, you're asking for too much. Your app only really needs photos, or it only needs this. And so this is a constant balance, because there are plenty of apps that are gathering data, right? And that data gets sold, whether it's your contacts or other things. And so there's been a huge push the last few years to limit, okay, only authorize the app to do exactly what you need it to do and nothing more, right? Back in the day, they'd ask for everything, like, give us all the information, all the permissions. And they're really trying to get that down, because that information leaks out. So this is sort of an example of somebody who's gone through an even more rigorous process to get permissions you wouldn't normally get.
Now is Rivets going to do the same thing, or as
well, they have.
Okay, so yeah. if I was an independent developer and I wanted to use Rivets, I have to ask Rivets for permissions to what APIs, or can I just go? How's that model going to work in Rivets?
Well, fortunately, they've already got the permissions to create the app and to run this service in the trusted execution environment, and that gives you a defined set of things you can do. Like I said, Rivets is an app that you can, you know, request these attestations. You can publish the identity data, and then you can call it back later.
But
that's a very limited set of apps.
But what I was saying is, are they going to be like Apple, or what you just mentioned, like, oh, I have to ask for Apple. Apple has to give me permission. Hey, I want their contact information, or hey, I want their location. And then they make a judgment as to whether or not I actually need that information for the app that I'm writing for the platform. Is Rivets going to, that's a whole app approval, right? Whenever you push an app and you want Apple to publish it, it takes a few days because they're going over your app, they're reviewing your app, whether or not they want to give your app permission.
Sure.
Is that the idea, where if I write a Rivets app, will I have to go through the same process, or is it just going to be it's just going to be the lowest common denominator? Is that?
My understanding is they're taking the approach of a permissionless system, right? So anybody that can pay the software tokens to access the system, there's really such a limited number of things you can do, is basically authorize and authenticate this identity data. And, you know, so there are very few nefarious potential things you could do while, you know, attesting to data that you published earlier, signed by your own device, right? So my understanding is Stephen's approach is to make this a permissionless process where any developer can
Pay the fee, right?
Pay the fee, you know, who's at an exchange, for example, and they want to do this. Now, the person will still have to authorize it on their device, right? So there's a check of authorization at that point. But beyond that, my understanding is the developers aren't going to have to go through some special process. And, you know, I think that's a smart approach to take is if you can push this down to the permissionless layer, you're going to get a lot more people using it than if they needed permission.
So how will this change? Once if Rivet succeeds and Stephen accomplishes what he sets out to do, how is that, what's going to change as a user's perspective? Now, am I not going to need to enter my username and password anymore? Like, what will actually be the benefit to me as an end user?
I'm thinking. I want to add to that also, David. That is this once the Rivets is commonly used through the crypto community. Is that going to eliminate the need for a hardware wallet such as this Trezor that I have in my hand, and then I can just use my phone as the hardware wallet? Is that what I'm hearing? Because it sounds like if that's once that gets going, I can just use this instead of having to carry this around with me. Or having this, I can safely store it here using the trusted execution environment, the portion of the chip that's inside the phone.
Yeah, I think that's part of what it's going to do for those that are carrying around specific hardware. This may offer them an option that's more convenient, and it offers to a much larger audience who aren't going to go out and buy that specific hardware. But the end state is I want to be able to log into my Exchange account. And you're still probably going to need your password and credentials and everything like that. I mean, you don't want to remove layers of security. But instead of connecting my phone or a Google Authenticator app, I'll pick the Rivets option, and it'll connect directly to my device or authenticate directly from the TEE in my device. And I'm going to feel a lot more confident that my Exchange account isn't going to be compromised because there's that extra layer of requirement. It's as if, and like you said, you can do this today, even with Trezor, for example. They support UFA, and that's supported by Google, so I can type in a little code and use it as a Newbie Key to authorize things. But again, most people don't own a Trezor and don't have this specific hardware, and so I think extending that to the mobile phone. But I want to be clear, this isn't a panacea. It's not going to close all security loopholes. If people are still authorizing things they shouldn't on their own device, they get tricked into it. Something, you know, somebody had mentioned it on the comments on the right. You know, there's still phishing. There's still other types of attacks. But what I think it limits the universe of is all the exterior remote attacks today, and really puts it into my device and in my physical security of what I'm holding. And yes, people still have to be smart not to click on links or things they don't know, but it makes it a lot harder. And what you want to do is, in security, this is referred as the attack surface, right? And I think about it like, right now, the attack surface is really big. It's like the size of a football field. And I would like it to be the size of my phone, right? I want it to be very limited and very narrow. So, okay, yes, I still have to be smart, but it's within this narrow defined frame versus everywhere. Like I can't protect against my phone company giving away my number.
That's right.
Right? Like, I mean, I can try, I put the code on there, I can, you know, do a few things, but it makes it a very smaller universe of things.
So really what Rivets hopes to accomplish is that the security is narrowed to the point where it's just the physical device that's in my possession that needs to be secured, rather than did I put a PIN on my phone, and did I add two-factor authentication, and did I, I mean, it's scary. I mean, questions. After all these hacking events, I put, you know, Google Authenticator for all my Google stuff and hardware security, and I realized, oh, I even need Microsoft Authenticator, which Microsoft owns Skype. So if you want to secure your Skype account, you end up with a Microsoft Authenticator. And I could see for weeks after these hacking attempts requests for multi-factor authentication while I was like driving and stuff. Like, it clearly wasn't me. Every few hours for weeks. So there were people very actively going after my accounts, and that was the only thing standing between them was this little Microsoft Authenticator app I only added, you know, a few weeks before, right? So that
didn't really feel great. That was like, wow, I feel really vulnerable and really insecure. And so a few weeks after that, he approached me. It's like, yeah, we need to fix this. And I'm like, yeah, we do. And that's what
from an advisor, from a Rivets advisor's perspective, right? What do you see, like, where do you see this Rivets going? And once it gets, you know, into the hands of the people that need to use it in crypto, what are the implications and what do you see as the value of this? I mean, do you see this, like, once it gets going, that it'll be as big as something like, you know, I don't know, is it going, has the potential to be as big as Facebook or McAfee Security or where do you see this, you know, if they're able to get this into everyone's hands and to use it, where do you see this from a big picture perspective and a long-term perspective, David?
I'd say it's probably more comparable to groups that are doing background security that maybe people aren't as familiar with. You know, you talked about McAfee, ForcePoint. There's a number of groups out there that do this type of cybersecurity. I think that's the level of the potential because literally everything in the blockchain ecosystem that has a wallet or has assets needs this type of built-in security. So I think it is a platform that will end up being broadly adopted. And I'm really excited to see the community really demand that, especially after every high-profile attack. We can't just say, well, make it better. Now we have something specifically to ask for, right? I remember before 2013 when there was no multi-signature architectures available in the blockchain space. And as soon as that came out, people immediately demanded, like, are you kidding me? You don't have multi-sig? Everybody needs multi-sig if they're a serious holder of these assets. So I hope it's that next best practice that's going to get implemented in the community where it's like, come on, we've got Rivets now. You had an attack. How can you have not implemented this? You guys need this immediately. And then, unfortunately, I think those kind of events are what drives people's focus and attention. Right? People care about something when it matters. Right? Nobody cares about security until they're attacked. Right? Then all of a sudden, it's really important. Right? So my hope is that we're going to see it as that fundamental, foundational layer that can offer a much higher level of security than we have today.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have at the moment. If you guys that are watching us live right now, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and type it in, and then I'll look up for the ones that pertain directly to Rivets. And then how
about this? Let's go over their ICO, which is currently going on. If people are interested in Rivets, how can they get involved, and how should they, if they want to invest in this ICO, how would they do that?
Well, I try not to give investment advice. I'm not a financial advisor, but I try to just get information out there. And so I mentioned at the top of the program that I've written an informational report after doing a lot of due diligence on the project, and it's purely, you know, here's the team, here's the technology. You know, I pulled different statistics down from their website about the software sale, and I've gone ahead and published that on my Medium blog. So just Google David Johnston, you know, Medium, Johnston EC is the handle. And you can check that out. And there's a lot of information there from sort of what I've learned about the project the last 3 or 4 years and seeing them evolve. And I also go into risks. You know, every project has risks. And so if you get towards the bottom, you'll see a whole section on risks, issues, you know, potential problems. And I do that for every project. Even back then, I was looking back at my old Ethereum report, you know, and I called out, like, the technology is really hard. This may take longer than expected. And it took almost a year longer than expected, right? So, you know, I'm not trying to paint a perfect picture, but what I am trying to do is disseminate factual information about the software sale, but really about the technology so people can wrap their mind around this. So that's the best thing I can point to beyond their website as a primary source of information, is just the informational report that I released.
Okay.
So, cool.
People are asking about how, you know, because Leon likes to do valuations of the projects that we look at. And I just want to tell the audience that there's not enough time to do that in this video. Leon and I will look at doing that in a separate video. This video is like David is saying, you know, we just want to ask David more of the factual questions regarding the Rivets project. Okay. Now, I think D Killer here asked, how do you see the rivets being used to stop the attacks on an exchange like Poloniex? Do you think that that can be used? I guess what he's talking about is the DDoS attacks that constantly bombard the exchanges like Poloniex and all the other exchanges?
Mm-hmm. It certainly can be helpful if they've established a good database of their primary users. I mean, you still have people that want to visit the website in general, but a lot of exchanges have separated the service of their front page, if you will, from the back end where they serve people that have logged in as users. So if you have an attack, which is tons of people hitting the home page, which is harder to filter people out, it doesn't bring down on the back end. But this is just another tool to give them better idea of who's accessing, or potentially make it easier for good actors to go in saying, yeah, I'm happy to authorize who I am, you know, if that means I can get through the firewall of all these bad actors attacking who are going to get blocked. So it's just another tool for accomplishing this. Like I said, it's not a panacea, but it's a level of security we really haven't seen before at this level of convenience.
Okay. Whatchamacallit, Hubert here asked, I don't know how to say his last name, but Prichnovic. He asked if Rivets, let me see here. It just scrolled up when I was trying to read it. He asked if there's any other players in this security space that's similar to Rivets. Is there a competitor or somebody, or are they just the only ones in this security space?
They're the only ones that I'm aware of specifically focusing on blockchain use cases. There are other groups that do this type of trusted execution environment. Off the top of my head, I don't know the whole list, but RSA and other groups like that provide this for large enterprise companies. There's a lot of these different conventions and conferences, cybersecurity conferences, and you can check out lists of competitors there, but I'm not aware of any of them that have then said, okay, we're going to release a product or an app specifically for blockchain use cases, let alone do a native integration where, you know, I'm going to put a smart contract in Ethereum and let people, anybody, you know, do these type of attestations or request these type of attestations. So I'm sure others will move into the market, but from what I've seen, you know, somebody brought up Waves, which was a previous project that Stephen worked on in the early days of the trusted execution environment. It was almost, you know, sort of really at the early, you know, too early stage of, you know, the project was offering this technology, but it wasn't yet mass market. It wasn't in 2 billion devices. It was in the first, you know, million devices or whatever. And so you need a certain level of market penetration before these things can succeed.
You know, sometimes a company or a business can come to market too early.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There were plenty of
like Friendster and MySpace. They came just a little bit too early.
Yeah, and there were lots of video streaming services before YouTube, like literally hundreds. But before 2005, bandwidth was just not good enough that most people could stream decent video quality, right? So if you did a streaming thing in 1998, you might have been too early, right? Yeah. So you had to be 7-8 years later.
We just recently had a 10-minute limit, even on YouTube, if you guys remember that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's come a long way.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, some people may be negative about the fact that Stephen's been in this for a long time, but we haven't seen mass adoption of trusted execution environment. I don't think that makes sense. I think it makes a lot of sense to me that he's been very dedicated to this technology, is like one of the foremost experts in it, and is dedicated to finding like the real use cases people care about. And like I said, this isn't for everything. If you're logging into some photo sharing site, you might not care. But if you're caring about all of a sudden these digital assets, which are on your device like never before, all of a sudden it matters a lot. Right.
And yeah, and I have a question actually. Can you tell us why Rivets is based in the Cayman Islands and not in the United States? Because he seems to be, I mean, he is an American, right, Stephen. So why did he choose to?
Yeah, because there seems to be a Rivets.com and Rivets International, Rivets INTL.com. That's two separate entities there. Could you explain that?
Well, I'm not legal counsel, but I take it his legal counsel recommended an international approach, and we've seen that out of a lot of crypto projects. Like there's the Ethereum Foundation based in Switzerland, right? So, I know blockchain.info is in Europe, London or Luxembourg, if memory serves. And this is true of a lot of foundations. So there's just, I think, a lot more clarity internationally about doing these software sales. There have been, sort of more movements by regulators to speak to them in detail. So I think that's just the reality of our space. People do things out of London and Hong Kong and Switzerland and other areas where they've seen that regulatory clarity. Now, hopefully we'll see that regulatory clarity emerge in the US. It's starting to bubble up, and hopefully we see more of that. But I think until people are comfortable that they've gotten that level of clarity that they see overseas, they're going to shy away from US jurisdictions. And I remember Ethereum even struggled with that, whether to even serve US persons. At first they were going to not serve US persons. So eventually they got comfortable. I remember that in 2014. They got comfortable and said, okay, we feel good that we can. But that's not an easy question to answer. It's so early in this space. There are still a lot of unknowns. So I respect that approach because it's basically a conservative approach to say we're going to do this internationally and we're going to serve US people as much as we can, but wait on some of that clarity.
Okay. The next question is from Miss Generic 123. And Ms. Generic asked if we, for our full disclosure, if we are invested in Rivets. And so we always say this to all the audience. If you hear me and Leon talk about a cryptocurrency project on our channel, it is safe to assume that we are invested in it. So you never have to. I don't know why, but people ask us that every time we broadcast, and we say the exact same thing, If you see us talking about it on our channel, more than likely we are invested in it, okay? Now, when we bring guests on like David, when we bring guests onto our channel, we don't like putting them on the spot to announce whether they invested in a project or not. David is an advisor to the Rivets project, and so it is safe to assume, I guess, that most advisors that are advising a project are probably invested in some way or another, in their time, their energy, their funds, or something. So I just want you guys to be aware of that. So if you guys ask, if we are invested in a project, always assume that we are if we're talking about it on our channel. And in this particular case, sometimes we talk about a project that happens to be a sponsor of our channel as well, such as the Particle. They sponsored us to do some research on privacy coins. And in this particular case, Rivets is also sponsoring our channel in one way, in one capacity or another. Okay, so just want to disclose that to everyone. And then the other one is this. This chat box is not so easy. But there's a question from one of the people, and they said that what do you think is the best use case for Rivets in the crypto space? Like the best use case that you can think of?
Wherever the most funds are vulnerable. So I'd say exchanges and wallets as a top of the list. People that are holding lots of funds on behalf of customers are in a really vulnerable position as custodians.
Honeypots.
It's a question from Kim Jin, and it's he or she asks, please mention one main business model that Rivets plans to pursue, such as a major client, either in the blockchain, cyberspace, cybersecurity, or what have you. So basically, the best business to go after with Rivets.
I know, for example, that there are enterprise customers Rivets has and is signing, and I won't speak to names because I don't know which are public yet. Stephen can certainly speak to that himself. But they're the folks that want to use the protocol itself. They're the kind of companies that have a lot of users and they need to authenticate them for access. And so I think that's the ideal business model, are the companies that are directly going to benefit from the security. You know, and that's about as specific as I can be. You know, I want to respect privacy and confidentiality.
Yeah. I also found out when I talked to, not you specifically, but other crypto projects that we have talked to in the past, what we've learned about when we ask that question is sometimes the crypto projects do not want to reveal to their competitors who their clients are. So that's I think that's a good question to ask, but I also think that that's one of the few questions that we let on our channel, we let the crypto projects slide with, because we understand as a business that, you know, that you have to protect yourself against competitors. So that's like, you know, we wouldn't want to put you on the spot to ask us, you know, to ask you who your clients are for Factum, you know, since you're the chairman of Factum, right? Because then there are other competitors out there that might go after it before you do. So that's something that in the past we've learned that we don't drill too hard on that question, you know.
But it's a fair question. The business model is really important. And what I would say is it's really straightforward with Rivets. It's companies that are using their API suite to make these requests to the smart contract that are going to be consuming or at least sending and funding the use of those servers to do that authentication. So it's a really straightforward model. You know, you don't have to, you know, try to really wrap your head around it very hard. It is, you have these developers that are making requests that have these users and they're authenticating their devices, and they have to do that every time the device shows up at their service and wants to make a request. So it's a recurring stream of revenue in the sense that they're always making these requests. And I think the intention is for Rivets to run the initial smart contract and to make it open over time so more people can run the software and do this attestation service, but all of them will consume the software license, the Rivet token that they're creating in order to provide this function.
Now, Lubo Reminar asked if Rivets, when Rivets kicks off, right, will it be applicable to new devices only, or will it also be applicable to current devices and old devices?
Should be applicable to any device that has one of these trusted execution environments that Rivets is approved to access. So there's something like 2 billion devices between computers and phones that already have a trusted execution environment.
Would you say that's every phone and computer in the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
I'd say the last 2 to 3 years, is really ramped up. You know, when I first talked to Stephen in 2013, I think there were 500 million devices that had a trusted execution environment.
Sure.
And today there are 2 billion.
Sure.
So it's quadrupled in the last 3 or 4 years. I wouldn't, you know, I don't think there are many modern devices that are made without them at this point. So we're going to get to most market penetration, and I'd say the next 3 or 4 years is old laptops and old devices move out of the
okay, so once you bring that up, when is Rivets going to launch? I mean, the ICO is going right now. When does Stephen expect, like, Rivets to be live, that I'm a developer, I can now integrate Rivets now using I'm an exchange, or I'm one of these custodians of these honeypots that I want to protect. How far out is is it 6 months, a year, 2 years when I can start to use Rivets to protect?
You mean through a smart contract that they're setting up versus what they're doing today as enterprise customers?
To get to the vision of what you just described. How is that? Do you believe that 6 months from now, a year from now, what does Stephen believe? What is the timeline that you expect to see?
I remember getting this question about Ethereum early on, and I always punted and said, I don't know. I have confidence in Vitalik and the team that they'll deliver, and they'll deliver the right thing, and they'll push it out when it's ready. And I would say the same about Stephen. You know, I can't promise or forecast whether it's going to be 6, 12, or more months for their team. But what I know is they already have the technology working. It isn't a proposal. It isn't a white paper. It's something that's in production today for enterprise customers. So the question really becomes—
But the blockchain's not working.
That's right. The question becomes how long it takes them to extend that existing service. Well, they're using Ethereum.
Yeah, okay.
To be clear, they're not building something from scratch.
But Stephen had told me that they're issuing the Rivets token as an ERC20 token, but that's not going to be, that may not be, Ethereum may not be the blockchain I remember he said that he was going to create his own block. They were going to start a new blockchain that had the features that they required.
They'll need a tech stack, and I'll leave it to the team what they end up choosing, whether it has pieces of Ethereum or Factum or other services that give them what they need, because they'll probably need a combination of different services. And I'll let the team speak to that. But what I'd say in my analysis is I have confidence that that team can make those decisions intelligently. And that's really what it boils down to. And like you said, since they're using an ERC20 token, it's available immediately as far as the software token. And it's a question, and we'll see how they perform, to connect their existing service to that smart contract and begin executing it. But there certainly are scalability, and this is one of the risks I believe I mentioned in my post, is Ethereum hasn't scaled yet, right? A popular software sale happens, and it runs out of capacity, right? And there are a lot of great proposals and work that Vitalik and the team are doing to scale Ethereum, but it's not quite there yet. And so for Rivets to function, they'll need they'll need Ethereum, and they'll need other technologies to scale their ability to do this on a blockchain. So, you know, I'd say they're dependent on the success of the ecosystem, and they can't go faster than the ecosystem itself. But I think there's enough capacity today, and there are plenty of other technologies available that can bridge the gap, and that there's enough tools to do it. And I'm very confident the ecosystem will scale, whether through its big blocks or you know, second layers like Factum. There's a lot of approaches we can use to get that scalability over time.
You know, one of the things that I want to bring up also, David, is one of the things that got our attention about the Rivets project is that, like, you know, most of the current ICOs and token sales that are being done right now since the beginning of 2017, most of them have raised bucket loads of money just on a piece of white paper that's not even complete. And it's not even a white paper, it's just a summary, right? And one of the things that got our attention, you know, as more and more ICOs and projects are coming out, one of the things that Leon and I have been looking at is that to look at projects that actually, you know, that really gets our attention are the ones that actually have a working product, that actually have software that we can, you know, that shows that it can work, you know. And that's one of the interesting things about Rivets that we saw, was that they actually had working software. And when Leon first told me about it, he said, hey, they actually already have the early software out already available for people to see and use. And that was kind of surprising to me, because most of the projects that we have nowadays is just a piece of paper. It's not even real yet. So you have any comments on that, or you have any
it's
feedback?
definitely refreshing that they're so far along, right? It's more a case of the blockchain ecosystem is now ready to support this use case versus somebody finding out about the blockchain last week and saying, oh, I should do a software sale. Unfortunately, there's a lot of that going around. And I have the same penchant. I'd much rather get involved in a project that has a proven track record. And as I mentioned, I encouraged Stephen to evaluate this model as far back as 2013 and 2014, but the tools just didn't exist to pull it off. And so he kept nose to the grindstone and actually got the approvals he needed, the technology into production, got enterprise customers, and now that the ecosystem is caught up, he's ready to release this new version of the model, which I think is really exciting because it's something I've been hoping for since 2-3 years ago. That's definitely a differentiator, is people that actually know what they're doing and also know blockchain really well. Stephen's been in this for 3-4 years, since 2013. He knows what they can and can't do. He knows the players in the ecosystem. He knows the technologists in the ecosystem. So it's somebody approaching this from a deep knowledge, not from ignorance.
Yeah. So that's because one of the things that we are always concerned about on our channel is that we talk about so many different ICOs and cryptocurrencies that there's got to be bound to be just the statistically there's going to be bound to be one that's going to be a piece of crap. So it always makes it easier to talk about a project that already has working software, at least in the early stages, so that people can see that they're not gonna and the fact that he used to be the CEO of a former publicly traded company in the U.S. Is also very helpful, so that we know that he understands the laws and the regulations in the U.S. as he's doing the project. So the other question that we're getting a lot here is several times is in the chat box is what is the difference between Rivets and Civic? I'm not sure how that even came up, David, but you know, Civic is an identity project, and it seems like to me Rivets is a computer security project. So you guys want to comment on that? I'm not even sure how Civic even came into the picture.
Yeah, I think Civic is a little bit different. I believe Civic is trying to verify your personal identity as to who you are. Like I did briefly look at it. I'm not very well versed in Civic either, but I think what it sounds like to me is that they want to be like a decentralized Facebook. You know, now you can log in with your Facebook identity, but they want a decentralized identity. So whether or not I am Leon Fu is controlled by me, and not Facebook or not Google Authentic or not LinkedIn or one of these other services. I think Rivets, it sounds like, is they're not actually authenticating my identity. They're authenticating my computer, that the computer belongs to me, not necessarily that I am necessarily Leon Fu. It's just that this computer or whatever hardware device of this computer or this phone is associated with this account. Is that fair to say what Rivets is?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I don't think Civic at this point has any interaction with the trusted execution environment. So they're not taking a Rivets-like approach when it comes to device identity. I'd say that's probably a good differentiator. Is this is about device identity when it comes to Rivets versus Civic has built this great mission around personal identity and taking back control of your personal identity. And they may very well be complementary. If Civic ends up leveraging something like Rivets, they may be able to even have more confidence about connecting that identity or controlling that identity. But this becomes another tool in that toolbox. But big fan of Vinny Lingham, known him since 2013 at the San Jose Bitcoin Conference, back when he was doing Gift, right, which was the first gift card company to accept Bitcoin, which was a brilliant move on his part, and very excited to see him back doing another blockchain project after he exited that one.
Yeah, we saw him up there at Token Summit in last May in New York, and he was busy explaining the Civic project. But let's get back to the Rivets here. This is the last question I see in the chat box here. Ken Shiro Dark asked if Rivets, as a Rivets investor, can they use Rivets to secure the network? Is it a staking model? Is it a mining model? Do you know that, David?
You'd have to ask Steven. I've looked at their paper and things like that, but if you're using ERC20, you're really leveraging the existing security model of Ethereum. That's how you're securing the tokens with the proof of work and hopefully eventually proof of stake that they're implementing. That's a good question. But we'll see how they end up doing it. I think because of the way it's structured, to a certain extent, you need Rivets to play an important role since they've gotten these permissions from the Intels of the world. So it'll be interesting to see how they play that out, but I won't speculate about what they're going to do in the future. Just that using the token is very simply access to utilization of the protocol.
Okay, one last question just came in here. I think it's relevant to Rivets if you are familiar with it. They're asking about the token sale and if the Rivets price will go up before the crowd sale is over. Or do you know anything about that, or how the bonuses work, or?
I've got all the stuff on their website in my report. That's probably the best place to look. They've got the details in there about how it's structured for the early sale and the main sale. Again, I don't speculate on price. I don't know what the market's going to say. The market may decide it's worth more, it's worth less. It really, over the long term, I think about these things more as fundamentals. Are more people going to be using this service and gaining utility from it? If so, then a valuable project, and it's not. So I try to take a sort of value approach rather than, I don't know what it's going to be tomorrow, and I don't know what it's going to be in a week, right? But I believe projects that are valuable over time will be valued well by the market.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. If Can you share the report with our audience? Is that available? We can get a link to it and then put it in the description box later on.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, you can pop it in.
Okay, and this last one is not a question; it's just a comment from Miss Generic 123, and I'm gonna wrap it up after this comment. But he or she says that based on a careful analysis of your skin, facial skin, you must have a dairy allergy. So I have no clue how they can determine that through a video on YouTube, but apparently, I don't know if it's a troll comment or if it's serious, or I don't even know where that came from. So I had to bring it up.
Luckily, I'm happy to disclose I already had my 23andMe done, and I do not have a lactose intolerance. So I'm
lactose intolerant. I am lactose intolerant. Okay, I don't know if you are, but I know I am, because when me and Leon go out, I never order. Leon loves cheese and dairy products. I hate cheese and dairy products. You know, but I'm not sure if it's a troll comment or not. But it was just, to me, it was just hilarious. So I had to share it with you. You know, for taking the time out to talk about rivets today. You know, so that's all I have. Any last comments about or things that people should know about rivets before we conclude this broadcast, David?
Well, you know, the biggest thing I'd say is I don't advise a lot of projects. To your point earlier, you know, I do this a couple of times a year with groups that I well know and think are really important to the infrastructure of the space. And I just encourage people to get involved, right? They can actively, as users of these exchanges and wallets, have a voice to say, we want this type of thing implemented to improve security. And that's what's going to drive these services to do it, right, is user behavior. If you're going to prefer one exchange that has better Rivets-based technology and security than another, then that's what's going to move the needle, right? So we as a community need to continue to encourage best practices by these exchanges and others, because the worst thing that can happen to this space is there are bad hacking events, bad, you know, attacks, and a lot of people lose money. And that's when regulators step in and say, we're going to save the day through licensing and through regulation. What we really want to see is it emerge organically from the community to come up with real solutions that can have meaningful effects on reducing these security problems. So I would just encourage people, don't be passive, be active. You can request this of the exchanges. There's probably a lot of people here on your channel or that follow this information that may even work at these exchanges, developers that have the power to say to their bosses and the owners of the exchanges, hey, we can do this. Here are the APIs. This isn't a big deal. This is something our customers need. So I would just say be active about encouraging that. I remember the early days of Bitcoin, that's how we got merchants, right? People encouraged merchants to take it. Like, I would buy your product if you took Bitcoin. I would use your exchange if you used Rivets, right? This is the type of advocacy that as users we have a lot of power to do. Right. And I really hope you guys do that actively and not just, oh, this is nice and I hope they do it, but you make your voice heard.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for taking the time to come on and give a better. You know, Steven's not going to be happy that I said this, okay, and he might get upset. But I think you had a better explanation for the lay people.
Yeah.
You know, last time we had the interview with Steven, I think that it was more suited for the people that are technical, like LeonFood.com, but the regular folks on Main Street, like myself, I think that your explanation helps me understand it better. So I want to say thanks for that, and thanks for joining us today. Also, LeonFood.com, right? Oh, by the way, you guys are joining us from the Factum headquarters.
That's right. And there's no air conditioning here. So
I know you guys are sweating over there. Yeah.
Sunday afternoon, Sunday here. So yeah. So.
It's Sunday, and office is closing. You guys came in for this broadcast. So thanks for coming on and joining us, and thanks for sharing what you guys know about Rivets to help our audience. And thanks for broadcasting from the second best city to live in America. Awesome. Okay, this will conclude the broadcast, guys. Thank you, David. Thank you, LeonFood.com. All right.
Bye, guys. Take care. Bye.